what's happening now, which we've probably not seen, is the fact that AI agents are talking to AI agents via us. What I mean by that is the fact that, is that in the next 5 years? Probably not for universities. They're slow to adopt. If they don't, they will fail. Transformation becomes extremely, extremely difficult, right? Universities are so far behind the curve, right, when it comes to, there'll always be roles that got human elements to it, and I just think, we have to accept that some roles will just disappear.
Paul, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on. How's your week going?
Good. It's been a good week so far. All right, some challenging times, but that's all part of the course.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to delve a little bit deeper on that today. Just to kind of kick things off, the way we like to start is we ask you a question from the last guest. So to kick things off, the first question is, how are you currently nurturing or supporting your teams?
Very interesting question, that, especially at the time at the university that we're currently experiencing. All right, and what I mean by that is the fact there's a big downturn in universities at the moment, where kind of like, they're under financial pressures. All right, and this leads to a lot of uncertainties and the look of optimization of processes and looking at ways to save money. So it makes your teams a little bit uneasy. All right, and kind of like worried, all right, about their own future. So nurturing and supporting is kind of like a key element. So, I have heads of service that report into me, all right, and it's important that I can like communicate to them what is going on. So I have a very open and transparent communication model, all right, where I tell them as much information as possible, but I ask them when I'm giving them this information just to make sure they take it in the right context. I'm giving this information not necessarily for them to float all the way down, but for them to take the parts where they feel it's important for their staff. Right. So this is what the support and nurturing becomes about, is kind of like giving them as much information as I feel is necessary. All right. But also making sure that they feed them that information down through the channels themselves, so that actually, doesn't matter what grade you're at, they're getting the information that they need and is appropriate for them without adding more concerns. So, as an example, I might be kind of like, looking at going, well, I'm looking at value streams, right, for the sake of about how we might change the way that we operate. And so subsequently, what I've got to do, all right, is quite simply, is kind of like go, well, we're looking at this, but don't look at it as I'm looking to remove staff. Looking at it as, doesn't find the fact that we're looking for new ways of working and operating to make us more efficient. That's how I go about kind of like those things.
It's a great example, and I definitely want to delve deeper on that. But I think it's important that we kind of start from the beginning, kind of talking about your journey and where it evolved from originally the British Army, moving on to global organisations, and now today in higher education. Talk us through your career, of where it started and kind of what got you into technology.
I started my career off by joining the Royal Engineers, right, as a boy soldier. Right, and why did I do that? Like most people, like those that want to go to university, they want to escape family. They want to experience new things. Poor background, and so subsequently, we were never seen as people that would go into education. All right, that was just not our thing. So I joined the army. There's positives and negatives to doing that. All right, what I would say about the positives around that is the kind of like what it does is discipline you, gives you structure. All right. And kind of like also, if you look at someone who's been in the military, you'll find that when you look at their insides, they're kind of like a red person. So that's how it set me up. All right. So give me the foundation. I came out for one reason or another after 4 years. And then the question came about going, well, what am I going to do? All right. I mean, I was young back in the day. I know it's not, you won't hear this around now. I got married by the time I was 19, I had a child by the time I was 20. I came out in the forces, so I had stability and everything while I was in the forces. Then I came out, all right, and you lose all that. And I kind of like, I would say, you just went from job to job. I wasn't kind of like, I wasn't highly educated, and I just had this epiphany. All right, where I woke up and kind of like, my son was like 2 or something like that, and I kind of like went, right. So I'm going to take him to the school. All right, it's first day of school, and the goes to talking to all his mates and says, "What's your dad doing?" Right, and that was that moment of realization, going, well, I'm a greengrocer, a blind fitter, right? That's the kind of jobs I was doing. All right. And so subsequently, that's where I kind of like got the went. Oh, you know what? Everyone said I was intelligent. Whatever. People just say things to be nice. All right. Okay. So I decided going. Oh, I'm so intelligent. So I applied to go to college. All right. To do a computing course at college. And I just kind of like just duck to water. All right, really enjoyed it, and I was able to do the analytical side of things, and so I was reasonably good at it. What I didn't know when I came out going to college, that all that gave me was kind of like a qualification to become maybe a shop manager. All right, it didn't give me the qualification I needed at that time to get into global industry to be an IT engineer. I'd been single parent. Um, and looking after my child myself, decided that I'd then go to university. I chose the university, which was a local one to me. All right, did software engineering management. Okay, and then from there, everything just snowballed. All right, I came out of that degree, and I went straight into kind of like the Donald Douglas Information Systems. Loved it again. I just threw myself into it. I just worked all hours God sent to make sure that that I was the top of my game. Just hard work, all right. But I was brought up in hard work from the army, all right. So it wasn't like unusual for me that if I was working through till midnight because I needed to learn some new programming skills, I would do that. And so subsequently, everything just snowballed. I was in the early days around computing, and then I started moving into. I then kind of like got a local job, all right, because that one was in Hempstead. I was living in Dorset. Local job, loved it, and that's where I was able then to write bespoke systems for people. Back in the day, I remind people again, we had to program tooltips. Right? So we had to, Dan Appleman used to be my guide about how to write APIs. You had to write your own API to actually add tooltips to fields. But whereas today they're just there, just tell it what tooltip you want and what help guidance you want, and all this kind of stuff. Whereas you kind of like had to program all that in back in the day. So I just kind of like, I just grew in that space, and eventually went into contracting. I got very lucky. And maybe my second or third contract, I got a contract with Smith Beecham at the time, and I started writing a laboratory management information system that tracked the DNA samples for the national genome. So I was heavily involved in kind of like played my part in the mapping out of the national genome. So it was exciting times, and I spent a lot of times traveling, I suppose, the world, right, with GSK, implementing the system across multiple sites, right, working in multiple countries. So that was exciting times. Then I moved into insurance, but it's all the same stuff. I was just always kind of like advancing my career. And then I had another one of those epiphany moments. So I worked one of those moments, and I kind of I made this decision going, don't want to be developing when I get to 50. As much as I loved it, I just couldn't see myself kind of like trying to learn new skills all the time, trying to keep on top of all these skills all the time and being at the forefront. And so subsequently, I then moved into management. So head of development, like TNT Post, product development manager, director at Informa for a little while. And then I was looking for a job, and I got into universities by accident. Like, it just came up, and it was kind of like one of those jobs going, well, the salary's not great. I just add it on my list of jobs. I probably won't get it anyway, go to university. I've got a degree, but, these people are super intelligent. This is Russell Brook University, University of London. I thought, never getting there anyway, but it'd be good experience, good practice for me. Yeah. And would you believe it? They offered me the job there and then, there on the spot. So that's where I ended up Queen Mary, and then, out in New Ruskin just happened to be in my doorstep, and an opportunity came along, right, which I couldn't turn down at the time. So, so that's where I am today. So, at the director level, so while I don't do the technical stuff, I'm able to articulate the technical stuff very much at the forefront, and a lot of stuff to do with AI.
How did you find that first transition into leadership?
So for me, it's easy. It was a lot easier. All right. So I'm a strong believer when you kind of like you move from kind of like being managed to managing. I would roll that back to maybe my service, time in the service, all right, because that's what you're taught command and control. So you're taught it's leadership, but I'm also a strong believer that actually some people are just born as natural leaders, all right, and will just take in situations wouldn't just naturally take a leadership control. And I give examples where I was kind of like a friend of mine was very poorly coming back from a holiday that we were all on together, all right, and I naturally just stepped in to take control of the situation, all right, not to be a hero and stuff like that. It was just that is that natural thing about being a leader. You kind of like just step in where others may step back. Right? And there's nothing wrong with those that step back. It's about knowing your limitations.
I was going to ask you, how does that influence your leadership style today then? Because I imagine you've had to iterate your style as the years have gone on.
Yeah, but having children's helped. All right. I think if I didn't have children, I probably wouldn't be maybe as empathetic at times. Right. But having children and seeing them go through life experiences and anxiety and everything, I think that's helped me adapt. Okay. Again, I think it's a case of just about listening to people, all right, and try not to prejudge, because normally when you prejudge, all right, you get it wrong. There's many instances, it's take the example of driving a car, all right, and someone whizzes past you, and cut you up, all right. Well, you actually don't know what's going on in their life at that moment in time, all right. They may be kind of like have a child in hospital that's very very poorly, or a parent that's dying, and they're trying to get their right to say goodbye to them, right? So you don't know what's going on in their life, all right. So you have to kind of like sometimes just step back as well. But none of it's easy, all right, and you don't always get it right.
Is there one thing you wish you learnt sooner, or from your experience you can think of? Like, there might be times that you got it wrong, and I feel like sometimes we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes.
That's what made me a better developer than my failures. I made some horrific mistakes, all right, where I wiped out a database, and that particular thing with that database for that time, I was able to kind of like rebuild it because I understood how it was built in the first place. So, I made a mistake, but I was then able to, by just sitting back and not compounding the problem, I was then able to solve it.
Is there any failures you can remember when you first stepped into leadership where you might have not got something right?
I made, kind of like saying, I'm concerned about a project that we're working on. I made some remarks about this project, and some of those remarks were quite cutting, right, to the director of one of the particular areas I was making a remark against, right. But because of the way that I outlaid it in my initial response, I had to then backtrack, right, and actually turn around and say, well, actually, right, I worded that badly. This is what I meant to have said. Sometimes it's hard to undo those things because once said, right, it's said. Yeah, so you've got to be careful with your wording, right, and how it might impact others.
And talking about transformations, talking about projects, and obviously kind of the area that we're focusing on at the moment is higher education, given working at the university, like what makes digital transformation in higher education uniquely challenging compared to other sectors or sectors you might have worked in?
It stems from the top, first of all right, okay, and universities are typically run right by academics. All right, so if you look at the top tier of a university, it's very rare that you will see anyone that's not come from a very heavy academic background. Finance director, of course not. All right, IT director, or CDIO or CIO, right? But typically they've been in the space a long time, right? So which is the same as me. So they spent years operating under the premises that what they've got to do is give the best experience for a student, right? So it's not about it's not about return of investment, right? It's not about kind of like value for money. It's about the experience for the students and making sure that they can. The end goal for them is the students come out with a degree. So that is their aim, right, to educate the students. However, right, and so what that meant is the fact that a lot of back office systems have been underinvested, all right, or all right, they've been kind of like homegrown, So subsequently, all right, you've now got a lot of systems that are basically carrying a lot of technical debt and with underlying bad processes, and that's what we're trying to unpick now. The problem is those systems are what operate the organisation. So to transform them, right, is kind of like a huge undertaking, right, and it's huge not from a technical perspective. So we can go in and deliver a new HR system. We can go in and deliver a new student record system. That's the easy bit. The hard bit is the fact that we don't understand, right, how that actually comes out as business functions. We don't do the business functions day in, day out. That is done by the business. And so you've got to bring them along on this journey. Right? So transformation becomes extremely, extremely difficult, right? And we're also asking them a lot of the time to do this transformation. At the same time, all right, they've got the day jobs. All right, so you've got this pressure over here that says we need more students, all right, because we need the financial commitment. You've got the pressure over here from finance going, well, actually, we need more money in, but we're not a business focused, all right, so we're not all about kind of like making profit. That's not what universities are, all right. And then you've got us in the middle going, by the way, this is really expensive now, right? But we need the commitment from the business. We need the finances, right? And we need to kind of like take everything that we've got sometimes and just throw it away and start again. But what we end up doing is we end up layering the debt on top of the debt on top of the debt. So it gets to a point where it's a house of cards. Eventually, it's going to all start collapsing. And we're seeing that a lot, and in with other companies when we try to replace our student record system, it's kind of like it just feels like that actually, if I was to replace my student record system, to me, right, with these companies I'm trying to deal with, it's a lot of the time it feels like I'm jumping out of the chip pan into the fire. It doesn't. So, but I will always quote people about transformation, all right, and it came from Microsoft. So I can remember being at Microsoft AI conference. They started with one of the conversation of saying, all right, that people thought that when they moved to the cloud, they were transforming. Well, actually, they weren't transforming. Right? They were just moving their on-premise compute, right, and giving it telling someone else to take responsibility for it. That's not transforming. That's just moving. All right. Okay. To transform would mean that actually we would take not only the kit, all right, give it to someone else, but we would also take the technology, the applications, right, and make it more like cloud proof. Use the cloud technology, right, in those spaces. So, so that was, and that was in relation to AI, right, and how it's kind of like going, with AI, we're all introducing AI, we're all doing AI agents. I'm doing a lot of it myself, and it's kind of like going, well, if I do an AI agent that just replaces what someone else is doing, have I been transformed? Probably not, because I've just replaced, or I've taken a human task and given it a digital task. I haven't gone in necessarily and looked at that task and gone, how do we improve it? Now, in some instances, we have. Right? In other instances, it's just a case of we don't have the time, we're just going to replace it, so at least then the human, right, can go on and do other things.
What do you think they could do different, though? You spoke about people sometimes think they're doing transformation, but they're not doing transformation because they're not actually transforming anything. Like, what can be done differently?
I suppose for those people, it's kind of like it's to look at the bigger picture. Okay, because what happens is those people that are not doing that sometimes, a lot of the time, are just looking at maybe their space. All right, when you need to look at the full life cycle, the full end to end. And then saying, okay, so if I then put it inside, if we were then to look at the end-to-end process and then reimagine that process, right, and then look at systems that we can actually use to actually deliver that, right, then you could be more transformative at that stage. I mean, I've got blue sky thinking in my head. I've got kind of like just day-to-day running in my head. I think the universities are so far behind the curve, right, when it comes to the technology and transforming, right, it is kind of like criminal.
Do you think it can change? Do you think or do you think it would take a lot of work? Do you think it's a mind? Do you think it's culture more than it is?
I think they'll be forced to change eventually, right? And that's coming out. We're being forced to change with. If you look at lifelong learning, all right, that's going to force us to react differently and work differently. AI is going to do that as well, right, to a certain degree. I mean, it's there, all right. If you don't embrace it, it's going to come and eat you up. But is that in the next 5 years? Probably not for universities, all right. Okay, they're slow to adopt. If they don't, they will fail. It's getting people that have got the vision and the foresight to see that, all right. And again, if you listen to kind of like Professor Martin Bean, he sees this, all right. He sees it the way that we've got to even re-educate students. Right? For the AI world, again, it goes back to kind of like universities have got to introduce business management into their process. They've got to introduce it, not to generate business necessarily, but to look at their business model. Okay? The minute they can start treating it as a business, then they're halfway there.
Talking about AI and talking about transformations, and you're going to get left behind the curve. Someone recently was saying to me that they think all digital transformations will have to be redone due to AI. Do you believe that's the case? Like, what's your take on that?
Redone is a strange word, I would say, because it's not a case of redone. I think it's evolution. All right? I just think it's the next step. So yes, all right, but we have to redo things all the time. All right. If you go back to where I was 20 years ago programming to where we are today, right, we've done it 5 times, when we replace a system, we're redoing it. So it's more of a case of the fact that actually we will think differently, we will need different systems, all right, and there'll be a different expectation, all right, from our student base, or our customer base, all right, about what they expect. So you look at kids now, all right, you take any child now that's walking down the street, I swear blind, when the minute they come out the wound, they're swiping. All right, they're doing this already because it's inbred into them while they're in the womb. So that's what technology is. There's an expectation, all right, when they go in. It's an interesting thing happened to me the other day. When I say happened to me, I was told about. So we've introduced this bot. Okay, and I've repeated this story many times to a few friends over the last few days. But we've introduced this bot as part of our ESM, our enterprise service management tool, right? And this is where students obviously engage with the bot and ask it questions. And so what they've noticed, and we don't respond to these questions, by the way, so I must clarify now that we do not respond to these type of questions. We close it down and like advising them. But they're declaring their mental health issues to a bot. All right. They are telling the bot how they're feeling. Right. They're asking the bot for advice about how they're feeling. All right. So it seems like that these next generations that are coming through, right, will talk more to a bot than they may do to a human. Right? And that's because a bot doesn't necessarily make a judgment on you, all right, or won't give you a sideways look, all right, or just won't roll your eyes, or whatever it may be that they feel nervous about. That itself gives you a little bit of snippet of what's happened, doesn't it? It just gives you a little bit of insight about how we need to change, all right, for our audience. Because if we don't change for our audience, then they're not going to fully engage with us. So if they're not fully engaged with us, then that's where you get the failures. That's where things don't work out as well as they're thinking. So they've got expectations, like I said before. So it's not about redoing per se, right? It's just evolution. It's about moving, changing with the times. Now, if you ask me so I was asked this question the other day, where are we in 5 to 10 years? What I would say is kind of like, if industry keeps developing as fast as it is, and we are in this accelerated cycle at the moment, all right, we should be kind of like everything should be conversational nowadays. So in other words, you will be having conversations, all right, with some kind of chatbot, all right, to do actions for you, or agent, AI agent. So an example, there's an example I always give is HR, all right. If you understand HR, you're in that space. Okay. So, but when I want to book leave, why do I need to go into a system, go to a page, all right, pick a date, all right, pick how many days I want, then press commit, it goes to my boss, all right, then comes back. Why can't I just go into a little chat and say, I'd like to book 5 days off between these dates, right? And the AI agent to talk back to me and go, by the way, do you know that you're here? It's also off at the same time. You may want to consider not going off at the same time because there might be a lack of senior management available. Or did you know that all your heads of service are? So you won't have senior coverage in your area. I've not had to go looking for that. I've been told this information. I can make a judgment. All right. So that's what I mean by conversational AI. I can then go through the process and say, well, look at some other dates. I can then say, right, can you submit that? What people want now is instant gratification. That goes over to my boss. It comes up on his screen. Paul's leave. He just presses one button. Yeah, because he knows it's been through a set of quality checks, if you want for a better word. I've got that instant response back. So when we're building our AI stuff, that's what we've also noticed. We can do that instant response.
Yep.
Right? What we're getting then is we're maybe relieving the pressure. So we've done a bot, an agent, sorry, let's use the word agent, for extensions. You're kind of like your student goes in and requests an extension, we filtered it down to make it as easy as possible process, right? But because we've got it all running in AI, that's a yes, they get it like that. So you imagine someone's going through a difficult time at home, their parents ill, maybe a grandparent or someone's died, all right, and they just need to kind of like just quickly do something, get this extension out of the way, and not have to worry about it. Not have to wait for a response to see if they've got the extension, right? They can just then they get this response, and then they're able to go off and do the things that are important to them. And that's where I see things going eventually, right? Now, will it go for the universities? I don't know, because the universities need to catch up. All right, okay, all right, and they need to make leaps and bounds forward.
Would you say that AI, all in all, is positive to society, transformation, IT? Because I think everyone's a bit scared at the moment in some aspects, shall we say? Obviously, it's quite challenging times globally, I would say.
Yeah, there's a lot of hallucinations. I remind people that at the end of the day, when you talk to all these things again, all this information, right, it's been programmed somewhere to kind of make some judgments and assessments. Okay,
Yep.
so I think people should be wary, not fearful. All right, wary. All right,
Yep.
and that's the understanding of it. Um, but again, this is evolution for you, all right? And I'll remind people about, I had a conversation with someone and they reminded me, ironically, about supermarkets. And I was going, oh, supermarkets, they're all these self-service tills and everything else like that. What about the impact on the workers? Well, they were just, those workers then were able to do other value add stuff, all right? And actually, the experience for the customer then became better. At the beginning, it wasn't, all right, because everyone was going, why am I'm paying all this money for, and no, I'm not getting to speak to someone, all right, and all this kind of stuff, all right. There'd be one person looking after 20 tills or whatever it is, all right. And I'm sure there was kind of like, staff were kind of like lost their jobs through it all as well. But I think, as I spoke to Alexander at Suits, and he was doing this paper on blue collar workers, the impact of AI on the blue collar worker, because the blue collar worker, to a certain degree, is kind of like they're the ones that are particularly impacted, right? The other people that are impacted are the ones that have kind of like got mundane jobs, maybe jobs that kind of like can easily be computerized, right? And you even say you wonder why they're computerized. They're easy decisions, all right, that can be done. A lot of the job I do, all right, can be computerized. And it's really interesting because I noticed that actually now, what's happening now, which we're probably not seeing, is the fact that AI agents are talking to AI agents like via us. And what I mean by that is the fact that I will do an email, I will structure it, and I will get AI to kind of sort it all out. I would just like do a breakdown. They would kind of like structure it, and I would go through all of it. Yeah, I'm happy with that, and I would send it. And then if you look at the response, someone's taken that information, plugged it into AI agent, all right, and sent you a response back. All right. So all of a sudden you go, well, actually, do we both need to be in the middle here? So, but it's just an interesting phenomenon. So, look, things are going to change, all right, and it's how we adapt to that. It's how society adapts to that, all right. You know, will AI ever be able to cut my hedge outside or trim my trees? The right thing? I doubt it.
It'd be good though.
Well, it would be. It would say, I don't want to do it. But so there's certain jobs that will always exist, but there'll be
Yeah.
other jobs that don't need to exist. All right, but someone still has to manage all those. Right. So now you need these human skills like leadership. Right. Okay. You need to teach people leadership. You need to teach people how to manage people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emotional
Those are going to be the
intelligence.
important things. A lot of the stuff that you learn now, you can learn in seconds. Just ask the bot. I'm doing a load of stuff around the blockchain. All right. And I ask it about the blockchain and I ask it about certain elements. And so, I was asking it about how do I kind of like make an NFT, all right, so that it's personalized to me, it can never be copied by anyone, and it's mine. All right. And I've never heard of this word before. So there's a soul bound NFT. All right. So, and I went, soul bound? So basically it's an NFT that is related to me, and I was looking at it for kind of like going, well, how do I have a digital version of my degree? How do I say I have a degree? And I was going, well, maybe we create an NFT, we put it on the blockchain, and say, but how do you secure it? How do you make sure someone can't copy it? How do you authenticate it? All right? How do you make it private? Yeah. All right. And it's able to give me all that information in seconds. I don't have to go hunting for it. It's quite a phenomenon. All right, that has happened. So that's what these students are coming through now. They've got all that at their fingertips. So they need to learn the other skills. They need to also learn what AI means, right? And when to use it, when not to use it.
How do you use it? How else do you use it?
I use AI a lot of the time for if I'm writing a strategy. I've got all these things in my head, and I just write it all down. So it's just one big jumble of words and expressions, and it's all intermixed. All right,
Yeah.
and AI will make sense of that. I might get a legal document or a kind of like someone else might send me a strategy or kind of like something, and I would can you just summarize it? It's freaking 80 pages. Just summarize it. Just because I'm not going to read 80 pages. My attention span myself will not allow me to read 80 pages. All right. And so I will use AI and then I might go, well, can you see if there's anything in there to do with student record systems? All right. So you can draw that information out. Is there anything there about security? So I can then compartmentalize it as well. I can kind of like go, give me the summary. Okay. So I want to know if this system is a secure system. So tell me about your security. And it would just extrapolate that. I used Google today. All right. And I think to myself, God, that's so old. All right, it's kind of like I googled something and it just came back with all these links, and I was going, well, that's boring, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, it just literally because I'm so used to now going into ChatGPT or Copilot
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, and you asking it a question, and it actually giving you the information, and it does give you links as well, but it gives you information. All right, gives you
Yeah.
more. All right, and it's substantive.
To your point earlier, though, is there not a risk that you said about the email example? You send someone an email, let's say ChatGPT, for example, summarized it. You send them the email, they reply back to your email. They've used an AI summary off the back of your AI somewhat written email. You mentioned documents as well. Someone might send you a document that's written in AI, you're reviewing it with AI and sending the reviews back with AI. At what point do we become redundant?
Well, that's my point. That's my point. Is going that's the worry for me. Going, well, actually, I don't need to be in the middle, do I? Why am I here? Why don't you just get these? Why don't you just talk to two AI agents, talk to each other? But someone still needs to prompt, right? So someone still needs to start that conversation on. So yeah, when I'm looking now at structures, target operating models, I often wonder, going, right, what are the true roles? Where are the real world roles going to be? And I think senior management, is there a requirement for senior management? There's a big question mark there. It will be, all right, because what are we doing? All right, I don't think it's necessarily going to happen in my career because I'm going to retire as soon as I can. All right, but it will happen. All right, you will flatten structures.
Do you not think, though, that there's still that human element that's going to be required? Because yes, AI might have the precision, but it doesn't have the human-led expertise around, you know, what it's actually like, how does it make someone feel? You mentioned those are the qualities that are going to be important. So that's where the people are still needed, because AI is not going to understand that, how that might make, I don't know, Phil, or, you know, Jackie might respond to X, so to speak.
Yeah, and you're right in that respect. But okay, it's kind of like it's about where that is necessary. The help desk system. You know, we have people on the other end of the phone to help people, which is great. Right, but you try getting help from some of these big corporate companies. It's like a minefield, isn't it? You know, whether it's you're on the phone system and it's IVR, all right. But now, what I don't know if you've noticed, if you try to get a phone number of a company, it doesn't exist. I've got a problem with my Samsung phone Z Fold, all right, and it was in warranty, and I've been trying to sort it out, and I swear to God, all right, okay, that I am just talking to an AI agent, all right, and I responded back saying, can I speak to a real person, all right, even though they've humanized it by calling it Donna, all right, or someone else, you just look at the content, you just think, no, that's automated. One, it's too quick, all right. And two, it's kind of like, well, you're apologizing, all right, but doing nothing about it. Yeah, so my situation still exists, all right. So and that's the bit that we are losing, all right. So it's a bit like the old days. I don't know if you can recall this, but at one stage, whether it was your TV, your phone. I'll tell you a story about a phone, all right, which is interesting. I learned this the other week. I still refer to my phone as a mobile phone. Okay? Right. Well, apparently Gen Z and Gen Alpha look at us. If you say to them, "I'm using my mobile phone," right? They would go, "What? What are you talking about? Mobile phone?" They just see it as a phone. Phones to them have always been mobile, right? They've never been tied to a wall.
Yeah, I call it a phone, not a mobile phone. I sometimes say mobile phone, but most of the time say phone.
But no, there'll always be roles that got human elements to it, and I just think we have to accept that some roles will just disappear and they won't be human. We just have to accept that. All right. And again, this is kind of like a lot of the stuff is going to be around. I can imagine the first things to go is, and it always mind boggles me, is kind of like why do we have such a big finance team? To me, that always seems very black and white.
Last question on AI, and we'll move on to people and culture. But where do you think AI can deliver the most value for universities, and where should institutions be more cautious?
I think institutions need to be cautious around kind of like how the students engage with it, right? How they use it. I think they need to make sure that they have kind of like the right rules and regulations around that. I'm not saying that people are necessarily cheating, because they're just using the tools that are currently available to them. But it's kind of like making sure that whatever they're doing, they understand it. Right? But it's also not to cut them off of the pass. It's kind of like they're going to have access to this. Let's acknowledge they're going to have access to this, and then we acknowledge that, then you've got a fighting chance that you can actually control it or manage it. If you don't, try and cut it off. All right, you're blinded. And so it's better to be have sight than it is to be blinded. I can assure you. Where can deliver the most value? I think just across the in the professional services side, I think it can offer a lot of value. So in other words, the operation of running a university. I would never suggest getting rid of academics, all right? But what I would suggest is the fact that we are looking at working with the professional services functions and processes, all right? And also for the students, a student comes along and says, I need a council tax letter, an exemption letter, for my council tax because I'm a student. You should just be able to kind of like just go in and just chat to a chat bot and it just be done.
Back to the people. What are the key ingredients for building and maintaining a strong digital team culture?
Maintaining a strong culture in a digital environment. I think, first of all, you've got to get the right target operator. You've got to make sure that you're kind of like building teams no longer in silos. All right. I don't think that, to me now, infrastructure is less kind of like tin. It's less, someone being in a cold room somewhere looking after computers. All right, they're very much part of the kind of like they're very much integrated into everything that we deliver. All right, so we've got to start. So first of all, you've got to get that target operating model right and not have silos. Remove the silos. All right, and kind of like this is where I think value streams like help achieve that. All right, so in other words, when you start building value streams, you're building kind of like how am I going to deliver value? Inside of a value stream. So there may be one around kind of like education. So how do I deliver my education with my systems? Right, that's my value stream. So the people involved in that value stream is every person, all right, that have contributed into that cycle. Whether it's the BAs, the testers, the developers, the product managers, all right, the infrastructure guys, all right, the ones that are kind of like delivering the cloud services. So I want to kind of like a value stream around RPA and AI, and I can't do that without the infrastructure guys. And I still call them infrastructure, but they're more cloud services now. They're more digital. You see what I mean? But all right, but if they're kept separate, then what I'm doing is I'm trying to do something over here, and then I'm going over here, all right, and I'm going. But if I just put you over here and you're just working with us, right, then surely we'll get more benefit and we'll be able to deliver quicker because we're all working to the same aims, objectives. Even though we are working to the same aims and objectives, but one's over here, one's over here. Why? It doesn't make sense.
And how do you keep people engaged and ensure delivery is consistent? Because I was having this conversation the other day as well, is that I always find with whatever it is, even if it's a huge transformation or it's just a small piece of work, people get excited at the start. People are normally, hopefully, excited by the end because it's delivered. But that in-between part is kind of the black abyss, shall we say, that people aren't too excited. But how do you keep that consistency?
That's a difficult one, isn't it? It's because you could say the same when you talk about consistency and keeping people engaged. Is like with the AI tools, Copilot. I can remember when we started looking at Copilot, we were working with a third-party company about kind of like how we do change management. And that. So what happens is typically you get this adoption curve. Everyone wants it, all right, and then there's this cliff edge where everyone's got it and then no one's using it, all right, because they just wanted it, all right. But how do I keep my teams engaged? All right. This is about kind of like it's keeping on top of the technology. All right. It's not trying not to lag too far behind. It's obviously difficult in universities, and if you can keep on top of the technology with them, all right, and bring them along on the journey, rather than kind of like have it all in my head. Okay. You might refer to succession management, whatever. But if they're kind of like know what's going on, all right, and they're engaged, all right, they're trusted, right, then you get all the respect, you get all kind of like everyone wants to be involved in things. It's a great story that I was once told by a company, right, and what they did is the fact that they wanted to move into cloud, right, and they were going, well, actually, I've got all these people that look after the computers in the computer room, right, on premise, right, but we want to move to the cloud. So how do we make that transformation? How do we go from that way of working to cloud where they actually don't get to touch the computer anymore? And so they made a decision, and it was the right decision because it worked. It's the fact that they would actually create a new team. Right? They would leave the old team doing what they were doing, right, and create a new team. And what that created was a bit of kind of like going, oh, I want to be part of the new stuff. And so rather than them, if they'd have stuck with them, the chances are they would have defaulted to their natural role. They would have just gone back to the weeds, right? Whereas when they got this over here, they wanted to be part of it. So there was that excitement coming across. Right? And it worked in that instance. So it was smart but dangerous. All right, could have backfired quite easily, but it didn't. But that's how you've got to think. So sometimes you kind of like got to be, you've got to be kind of like, be ready to be, what's the word? Brave. They'll be willing to be brave and make some changes, but don't make the idea is, especially for me, is not to make them on my own. So again, I've been talking to my teams this week about value streams, and I've said I'm not putting this on you, right? But I want you to see if this will work for you. And I say, people could tell me, well, you just come up with an idea, you just give it to someone else. To a certain degree, they're right. Okay, but if we can get it to work together, hey, who's lost? Right? And if it's not going to work, quite happy to turn around and say, look, I'm not going to enforce them on you that you don't think it's going to work. Right? But you've got to give it a chance.
And if you could change one thing about how universities approach digital transformation, what would it be and why?
If I could change one thing about digital transformation, it's at universities, so I think so I'd make sure every university, highest level IT person, right, sits on the board and helps, and they're a valued partner. And to be a valued partner, sometimes you may need to have a counterpart that's also comes from a business mind. So I go back to what I said earlier. The one thing that I would request is the fact that they have people at the top table, because that's the ones who are driving it. They're driving the change, right? So when they talk about AI, they talk about it from an academic point of view. They don't necessarily talk about it from a professional services point of view, because they're academic focused, all right, which is absolutely fine. But someone needs to come in and go, right, we need to do this. But but if they're not got a seat at the top table, what happens is they're writing papers and they're plonking a paper on the table. That's not enrichment. That's just all you're doing there is kind of like cycling round, and there may be a number on there that says £2 million to do this, and they'll see the 2 million rather than right when it's the true benefit of it.
That's some great insight. But just to wrap it up, Paul, we've got 3 more questions for you. What project or achievement are you most proud of in your career?
I think I go back. I go back to when I was at GlaxoSmithKline. Right. Started off at SmithKline Beecham. I was there through the transition into GlaxoSmithKline, and I wrote the laboratory management. I wrote it from the ground up. And we're tracking, we're tracking DNA samples, right, on microtype plates. You get the DNA sample in a tube, all right. So we would have to label that tube up. We then have to you then take that. You use pipettes. You take it out of that into a microtype plate, which is like 384 or 96, whatever it may be, and put it through a centrifuge and all this kind of wonderful stuff. Now, so it wasn't just about also programming. I had to learn kind of like, well, how do we kind of like label these things up? So I can remember the first time we did some barcodes on samples. These are little tiny sample boxes like this with barcodes. Right, we put them into a centrifuge. Right? A very fast machine. Right? I remember going in, and all we had in the centrifuge was a load of floating barcodes, because obviously we hadn't anticipated the heat, speed, and all this kind of stuff, and the impact that it's going to have, like on the label. So all those kind of things were all these huge learning curves, and of course it was part of something much bigger. I was working with some highly intelligent people. They were taking this information and they were kind of like relating it to drugs and all this kind of stuff. And there was lots of compliance and everything around it. But the pinnacle of that, I think, was the fact that, and this happens a lot, they were paying good money for me to be there to do all the work, and I was traveling all the way around the world and setting all this stuff up and all the different sites and everything, and working and improving it all the time. And I can remember the then turned around and says, the usual thing, when Paul gets hit by a bus, okay, or I decide to leave, who's going to have all this knowledge? And so they decided to bring in a company based out of Salt Lake City. And they came along and they did their presentation. Right, we're going to go with this company. They had Apple Newtons, so they were very clever in their thing. So back in the day, Apple Newtons, like for these Apple devices, that had Wi-Fi. We put these little Wi-Fi access points up. But we didn't have Wi-Fi back in the day. Back in those days, there was no Wi-Fi. This was the first Wi-Fi thing. And so they were showing them this big, heavy tablet. It was huge, like this Apple Newton tablet, right? And they were going, look, click here, and this is a sample, and you did it. All right, and really impressive. And so all the kind of like the board kind of like really bought into it. Going, all right, okay, let's replace the system, this laboratory information system, Paul's built, all right, with this one. So I then have to take them through it all. I took them through everything I've been doing. So anyway, sorry, these Americans sat with me, and I was taking them through everything, what we've been doing, and our whole process, and all the data, and everything. And they just sat there. The CTO just sat there and just. And this, I'll never forget it because it's one of the best moments of my life. Is again, I'm not sure why we're here. You know, because they had the system, right? They had the system, and so he was just saying, "Yeah, they want to replace that with us." So to them, you know, no, they could have been just being nice to me. Or okay, but I mean that's definitely one of my career highlights. I should have had a lot more career highlights in some of my personal developments. All right, but if anyone's read some of my LinkedIn posts, they notice that is that I was ahead of the game. That's how I see it. I was too far advanced. So it's funny that I was advanced. You know, I was working with tracking potatoes before from field to table was a thing. And now it's just the norm. But I was doing it back in the day, all right. But it just no one can let this will never take off, and yet it did.
Is there a lesson that you, or something that didn't go as planned that you learned from, or that you take with you today? Then
the lesson for me is the fact that if you asked me to go back in time and maybe what would I change, I'd probably be a bit more. I'd have more belief in myself, all right, in those situations, because there was many other time where we were kind of like on the brink of something, right, big, yet it's kind of like I was knocked back, and yet I allowed myself to be knocked back, right, and didn't kind of like push through my conviction. And I've learned from that. What I've learned from that is the fact that that's where my openness and candidness comes. You say it out loud sometimes. Okay, you can ask for forgiveness. Right? But if you keep it to yourself and then just watch everything around you fail, right? You can't say I told you so because you didn't say it. Yeah. Not that you ever want to say that, but for me that is the truest part of it. Yeah.
I think you've got to be open to be able to share what you think, and it doesn't mean that you're just trying to say it to be horrible or to try and be negative. But sometimes if you can spot something someone else can't, you just want to be open and honest. What's one question I should ask the next guest?
If you were to be stuck on a lift, who would you want to be stuck with and why? That question's asked to me. What I would turn around and say is the fact that I would use that opportunity to be in a Faraday cage with no technology available to me, on my own, do a reset.
Paul, it's been great having you on. I really enjoyed today's session. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Kim. All right, so it's been a pleasure. Hopefully you've managed to get something out of all of that.